Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
John Keel was born on March 25, 1930. He worked as a freelancer writer to local newspapers and media outlets. He served in the U.S. Army during the Korea War. After the war, he worked as a foreign radio correspondent before returning to writing. In 1966, Keel was commissioned to write an article on unidentified flying objects. He was determined to write the definitive article on the subject. Keel became hooked on the subject of UFO and began conducting his own field research. He traveled around the country, interviewing witnesses, and writing dozens of articles. The phenomenon, he learned, took its toll on its investigators. He entered a shadowy world where black cars vanished on country roads, meaningless messages turned up in hotel rooms, and his phone and mail suffered strange interceptions. After hearing about the Scarberry and Millet Mothman sighting, he made repeated visits to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, then the site of particularly active monster and UFO sightings. Reports of paranormal activity was overtaking the small town of Point Pleasant throughout 1966-1967, resulting in Keel adopting that area as his own research microcosm. As it turned out, Keel would not be disappointed with his selection of Point Pleasant. The result was one of his most popular books, The Mothman Prophecies. Upon arriving in Point Pleasant, Keel soon found strange coincidences and phenomena would follow him wherever he traveled. He would find the same thing to be happening with many of the eyewitnesses of the creature that was later dubbed the Mothman. In 1975, he published his book The Mothman Prophecies. The book was Keel's account of his experiences in Point Pleasant and his investigation into sightings of the huge, winged creature called the Mothman. The book combined Keel's account of receiving strange phone calls with reports of mutilated pets and culminates with the December 15, 1967 collapse of the Silver Bridge in West Virginia across the Ohio River. In 1967, Keel popularized the term Men in Black in an article for the Men's Adventure magazine Saga, entitled UFO Agents of Terror. John Keel vs. MIB, Keel would chase the men in black in attempt to confront them. He had the local police in many towns looking for them. When he was in West Virginia and Ohio, people would call his hotel and tell them that the MIB were there. He'd race over to the location, but they would be gone by the time he arrived. John Keel said that the MIB were mainly reported to drive black Cadillacs until he started doing articles about the MIB driving these cars. At which point they are said to have switched to Volkswagens. The cars they would drive often had license plates that had never been issued to anyone. A mysterious blonde woman in her 30s with a southern accent visited people in West Virginia and Ohio whom Keel had interviewed. She even visited those he had not mentioned in print. She introduced herself claiming to be John Keel's secretary, thus winning instant admission. The clipboard she carried held a complicated form filled with personal questions about the witnesses' health, income and the type of cars they owned, as well as their general family background, and some fairly sophisticated questions about their UFO sightings. John Keel didn't learn about this woman until months later when his one of friends in Ohio wrote to him and happened to mention her. One afternoon in spring of 1967, John Keel and a female friend were walking along 42nd and 3rd Avenue, NY, when a stranger with a pointed face deliberately took a photo of them and then turned and ran away. The man was wearing a poorly fitting sports jacket and slacks. The men in black, MIB, are humans or humanoids who supposedly appear anywhere major UFO sightings or other strange phenomena take place. They have been known to threaten people who have claimed to have seen UFOs and alien beings into not asking about what they witnessed. They wear sunglasses and black suits, usually they have olive complexions. They drive black mint-condition vintage luxury cars or fly in black helicopters. Some say that they are government agents, others claim that they are alien agents. The first reported occurrence of MIB was traced to Albert K. Bender, the editor of a flying saucer publication called the Space Review. In the October 1953 issue, he placed an announcement stating that he had come across information that would solve the flying saucer mystery but could not print it because he was ordered not to. He ended the announcement warning others in saucer work to be very cautious. He then stopped publication. Later in an interview, Bender stated that 3 men wearing dark suits had ordered him to stop publishing flying saucer material, and that he had complied with the order because he had been scared to death of them. He later published a book called Flying Saucers and the 3 Men. In his book, Mystery of the Men in Black, the UFO Silencers, Timothy Beckley has attempted to provide an overview of important and representative MIB encounters. According to Beckley, MIB have been with us for many hundreds of years, speculating that such diverse characters from the history of witchcraft and folklore as the Elizabethan black men, the Native American black man, and late 19th century reports of malevolent traveling salesmen might have been manifestations of what we now know as men in black. An odd incident in the history of the men in black is the strange case of Mr. O.H. Krill. Mr. Krill's writings first gained publicity sometime in the late 1980s when a text file called the Krill Paper was placed on the Paranet BBS. The file told the story of shadow governments in cooperation with gray aliens, secret underground bases, exchanges of human organs for alien technologies, and the like. He offers the following information on the men in black. All things considered, UFO research has become pretty much of a circus today, and the most intriguing and controversial sideshow skirting the edges is the question of the silencers, or the mysterious men in black. There is a strong subliminal appeal in these accounts of visits by mysterious dark-suited figures. I have been visited myself, as have others have known, attempting to silence UFO witnesses. A typical situation would be that a witness has a UFO sighting or UFO-related experience. Shortly thereafter, he is visited by one or more odd-looking men who relate to him the minutest details of his experience, even though he has as yet told no one for fear of ridicule or other reasons. The men warn him about spreading the story of his experience around and sometimes even threaten him personally, sometimes obliquely, sometimes directly. Any evidence, if it exists, is confiscated in one way or another. Sometimes the visit is for some totally meaningless reason and the subject of UFOs is hardly mentioned, if at all. But again, the men all seem to look alike. We actually seem to find ourselves in close proximity to beings who obviously must be directly connected in some way with the objects themselves or the source behind them, yet they seem to be functioning unobtrusively within the framework of our own everyday existence. The classic conception of an MIB is a man of indefinite age, medium height and dressed completely in black. He always has a black hat and often a black turtleneck sweater. They present an appearance often described as strange or odd. They speak in a dull monotone voice, like a computer, and are dark-complected with high cheekbones, thin lips, pointed chin, and eyes that are mildly slanted. The visitors themselves are often on absurd missions. They have reportedly posed as salesmen, telephone repairmen or representatives from official or unofficial organizations. Their mode of transportation is usually large and expensive cars, Buicks or Lincolns, sometimes Cadillacs, all black, of course. I might note at this point that their physical appearance also has included beings that have pale grayish skin, and that some of them have been seen to have blonde hair, yet they wear the clothing and drive the cars previously described. Their cars often operate with the headlights off, but ghostly purple or greenish glows illuminate the interior. Unusual insignia have been seen emblazoned on the doors, and the license plates are always unidentifiable or untraceable. The fabric of their clothes has been described as strangely shiny or thin, but not silky, almost as if they have been cut from a new type of fabric. Their often mechanical behavior has caused them to be described by some as being like robots or androids. A lot of descriptions of some of these folks are pretty bizarre. A businessman's family in Wildwood, New Jersey, was visited by an unusually large man whose pants legs hiked up when he sat down, revealing a green wire grafted onto his skin and running up his leg. There are other cases of MIB appearing on the other side of a wet, muddy field after a heavy rain, but having no mud whatever on their brightly shined shoes, and in the bitter cold, out of nowhere, wearing only a thin coat. Their shoes and wallets all seem new and hardly broken in. O.H. Krill's career was ended by John Lear when he made a television appearance with William Cooper. Lear was the son of the famous aviation engineer, heir to the Learjet Company. He claimed that his business connections with the military had given him access to secret Air Force documents related to UFOs. He had posted to Paranet his own UFO files, which were also full of secret alien government conspiracies. Cooper claimed to be a high-ranking naval intelligence officer, though records show that he was never anything more than an audio-visual technician for a Pacific Fleet briefing team. Lear heard William Cooper use the O.H. Krill name, while John Lear wanted to use the show to announce that he made the O.H. Krill Paper as a joke together with John Grace, head of the Nevada Aerial Research Organization. William Cooper went on to claim that he had first seen the Krill Papers in the early 1970s while working for the Office of Naval Intelligence. John Lear immediately pulled William Cooper aside and quietly told him, "Bill, O.H. Krill is a joke." Lear says that he and John Grace had used the name Krill from Bob Emenegger's special UFOs. It has begun in the TV special. A woman claims to have channeled an entity named Kryll. They had posted the file on Paranet as a prank. William Cooper replied that Lear was mistaken. He said that Lear was a liar and continued to do so until the day he died. Cooper was known to accuse all who disagree with him of being agents working for the conspiracy. Note, on November 5, 2001, Cooper was fatally shot by a law enforcement officer at his Eager, Arizona home after confronting deputies trying to arrest him and shooting one of them in the head. Authorities said the handgun-toting Cooper fled when Apache County deputies identified themselves and tried to arrest Cooper on charges of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and endangerment stemming from earlier disputes with local residents. Federal authorities reported that Cooper spent years trying to avoid capture on a 1998 arrest warrant for tax evasion, and according to a spokesman for the U.S. Marshals Service, vowed he would not be taken alive. Lear and Grace did not pull the Krill files entirely out of thin air. It was really a satire of the most extreme and bizarre UFO stories that circulated among the circles of UFO enthusiasts. If the descriptions of MIB are not directly from real stories from alleged witnesses, they at least bear a resemblance to some of the weirdest accounts. And many people did believe in the Krill files for a long time. Copies of the files are still to be found on the internet. These files have had an influence on the public perception of the Men in Black legend, and have almost certainly affected popular culture. John A. Keel's 1975 book The Mothman Prophecies is a great book regardless of your beliefs. Much of it focuses on the MIBs. They are definitely not simply agents of the government in this one. These excerpts from the Christiansen family's meeting with one will attest to that. They had just moved into a new home and had not yet been published in the phone book. A visitor came to the door, asked for Edward Christiansen by name. The huge man, at least 6'6", 2 meters tall, and very broad-shouldered, said he was from the Missing Heirs Bureau. Note, the Christiansen Encounter. In 1967, the Christiansen family from New Jersey, USA, had a bewildering encounter with a hovering UFO. Shortly afterwards, they were visited by a strange man in black wearing a badge engraved with unusual insignia. Inviting himself inside, the man proceeded to question the family for nearly an hour. They described him as massively tall, wearing a long black coat and a Russian-style fur hat complete with dark visor. Most frightening of all were his ominously bulging eyes and tinny computer-like voice. The family also noticed what appeared to be wires running down the inside of the man's leg. Wires that actually appeared to penetrate the skin and were held in place by a large round spot. When the man left the house, he walked to the edge of the pavement, where he was picked up by a black Cadillac with dimmed headlights and tinted glass windows. An unusual head, large and round, while his face seemed angular, pointed. His eyes were large, protruding, like "thyroid eyes, and set wide apart. One eye appeared to have a cast, like a glass eye, and did not move in unison with its companion. When he sat down, they could see a long, thick green wire attached to the inside of his leg. It came up out of his socks and disappeared under his trousers. At one point it seemed to be indented into his leg and was covered by a large brown spot. The Christiansens said their visitor had an unusual pallor. They assumed he was sick. His voice was also strange, with a high tinny voice. He spoke in clipped words and phrases, like a computer. Connie said he sounded as if he were reciting everything from memory. Then there is the case of Robert Richardson, of Toledo, Ohio, who in July 1967 informed the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization (APRO) that he had collided with a UFO while driving at night. Coming around a bend, he had been confronted by a strange object blocking the road. Unable to halt in time, he had hit it, though not very hard. Immediately on impact, the UFO vanished. Police who accompanied Richardson to the scene could find only his own skid marks as evidence, but on a later visit, Richardson himself found a small lump of metal which might have come from the UFO. 3 days later, at 11 p.m., 2 men in their 20s appeared at Richardson's home and questioned him for about 10 minutes. They did not identify themselves, and Richardson, to his own subsequent surprise, did not ask who they were. They were not unfriendly, gave no warnings, and just asked questions. He noted that they left in a black 1953 Cadillac. The number, when checked, was found not yet to have been issued. A week later, Richardson received a second visit from 2 different men, who arrived in a current model Dodge. They wore black suits and were dark-complexioned. Although one spoke perfect English, the second had an accent, and Richardson felt there was something vaguely foreign about them. At first, they seemed to be trying to persuade him that he had not hit anything at all, but then they asked for the piece of metal. When he told them it had gone for analysis, they threatened him, "If you want your wife to stay as pretty as she is, then you'd better get the metal back." The existence of the metal was known only to Richardson and his wife, and to 2 senior members of APRO. Seemingly, the only way the strangers could have learned of its existence would be by tapping either his or APRO's telephone. There was no clear connection between the 2 pairs of visitors, but what both had in common was access to information that was not freely and publicly available. Then there is a case where a man had supposedly taken a shot at a humanoid. One inclement evening in November 1961, Paul Miller and 3 companions were returning home to Minot, North Dakota, after a hunting trip when what they could only describe as a luminous silo landed in a nearby field. At first, they thought it was a plane crashing, but had to revise their opinion when the plane abruptly vanished. As the hunters drove off, the object reappeared, and 2 humanoids emerged from it. Miller panicked and fired at one of the creatures, apparently wounding it. The other hunters immediately fled. On their way back to Minot, all of them experienced a blackout and lost 3 hours. Terrified, they decided not to report the incident to anyone. Yet the next morning, when Miller reported to work in an Air Force office, 3 men in black arrived. They said they were government officials, but showed no credentials, and remarked unpleasantly that they hoped Miller was telling the truth about the UFO. How did they know about it? "We have a report," they said vaguely. "They seemed to know everything about me, where I worked, my name, everything else," Miller said. They also asked questions about his experiences as if they already knew the answers. Miller did not dare tell his story for several years. In September 1976, Dr. Herbert Hopkins, a 58-year-old doctor and hypnotist, was acting as consultant on an alleged UFO teleportation case in Maine, USA. One evening, when his wife and children had gone out leaving him alone, the telephone rang and a man identifying himself as vice president of the New Jersey UFO Research Organization asked if he might visit Dr. Hopkins that evening to discuss certain details of the case. Dr. Hopkins agreed. At the time, it seemed the natural thing to do. He went to the back door to switch on the light so that his visitor would be able to find his way from the parking lot, but while he was there, he noticed the man already climbing the porch steps. "I saw no car, and even if he did have a car, he could not have possibly gotten to my house that quickly from any phone," Hopkins later commented in delayed astonishment. At the time, Dr. Hopkins felt no particular surprise as he admitted his visitor. The man was dressed in a black suit, with black hat, tie and shoes, and a white shirt. "I thought, he looks like an undertaker," Hopkins later said. His clothes were immaculate, suit unwrinkled, trousers sharply creased. When he took off his hat, he revealed himself as completely hairless, not only bald but without eyebrows or eyelashes. His skin was dead white, his lips bright red. In the course of their conversation, he happened to brush his lips with his gray suede gloves, and the doctor was astonished to see that his lips were smeared and that the gloves were stained with lipstick. It was only afterwards, however, that Dr. Hopkins reflected further on the strangeness of his visitor's appearance and behavior. Particularly odd was the fact that his visitor stated that his host had 2 coins in his pocket. It was indeed the case. He then asked the doctor to put one of the coins in his hand and to watch the coin, not himself. As Hopkins watched, the coin seemed to go out of focus, and then gradually vanished. "Neither you nor anyone else on this plane will ever see that coin again," the visitor told him. After talking a little while longer on general UFO topics, Dr. Hopkins suddenly noticed that the visitor's speech was slowing down. The man then rose unsteadily to his feet and said, very slowly, "My energy is running low, must go now, goodbye." He walked falteringly to the door and descended the outside steps uncertainly, one at a time. Dr. Hopkins saw a bright light shining in the driveway, bluish-white and distinctly brighter than a normal car lamp. At the time, however, he assumed it might be the stranger's car, although he neither saw nor heard it. Later, when Dr. Hopkins' family had returned, they examined the driveway and found marks that could not have been made by a car because they were in the center of the driveway, where the wheels could not have been. But the next day, although the driveway had not been used in the meantime, the marks had vanished. Dr. Hopkins was very much shaken by the visit, particularly when he reflected on the extraordinary character of the stranger's conduct. Not surprisingly, he was so scared that he willingly complied with his visitor's instruction, which was to erase the tapes of the hypnotic sessions he was conducting with regard to his current case and to have nothing further to do with the investigation. Subsequently, curious incidents continued to occur both in Dr. Hopkins' household and in that of his eldest son. He presumed that there was some link with the extraordinary visit, but he never heard from his visitor again. As for the New Jersey UFO Research Organization, no such institution exists. On the 24th of September 1976, only a few days after Dr. Herbert Hopkins' terrifying visit from a MIB, his daughter-in-law Maureen received a telephone call from a man who claimed to know her husband John, and who asked if he and a companion could come and visit them. John met the man at a local fast food restaurant, and brought him home with his companion, a woman. Both appeared to be in their mid-30s, and wore curiously old-fashioned clothes. The woman looked particularly odd. When she stood up, it seemed that there was something wrong with the way that her legs joined her hips. Both strangers walked with very short steps, leaning forward as though frightened of falling. They sat awkwardly together on a sofa while the man asked a number of detailed personal questions. Did John and Maureen watch television much? What did they read? And what did they talk about? All the while, the man was pawing and fondling his female companion, asking John if this was all right and whether he was doing it correctly. John left the room for a moment, and the man tried to persuade Maureen to sit next to him. He also asked her how she was made and whether she had any nude photographs. Shortly afterwards, the woman stood up and announced that she wanted to leave. The man also stood, but made no move to go. He was between the woman and the door, and it seemed that the only way she could get to the door was by walking in a straight line, directly through him. Finally, the woman turned to John and asked, "Please move him, I can't move him myself." Then, suddenly, the man left, followed by the woman, both walking in straight lines. They did not even say goodbye. The Unexplained, Orbis Publishing.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.